sail away home.
When people think of John Denver, they picture the smiling folk singer with his guitar, serenading the world with songs about sunshine, country roads, and the beauty of the Rocky Mountains. He seemed like the perfect embodiment of peace, harmony, and simplicity, a man untouched by the darker struggles that haunt most celebrities. But the truth behind Denver's life was far more complicated. Behind the gentle voice and wholesome image was a man wrestling with demons that few fans ever saw. He battled turbulent relationships, an unpredictable temper, struggles with substances, and a dangerous obsession that would ultimately lead to tragedy. His story is not just about fame and music. It's about the hidden cost of living a double life, where the public image was pure light, but the private reality often slipped into shadows. And the more you look into John Denver's life, the clearer it becomes. The man who gave the world some of its most uplifting songs was carrying secrets that could bring it all crashing down. Roots of a troubled star. John Denver wasn't even born John Denver. He entered the world in 1943 as Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., the son of a decorated Air Force pilot. From the very beginning, his life was shaped by movement and instability. His father's military career meant the family was constantly relocating, sometimes across states, sometimes across countries. By the time most kids had a best friend, Denver had already left several behind. This constant uprooting created a sense of loneliness that would follow him for years. Denver often described himself as the outsider, never fully fitting in anywhere. But amid the chaos of moving, one moment changed everything. When his grandmother handed him a 1910 Gibson guitar. That instrument became his anchor, a way to pour out the feelings he couldn't express in words. Music wasn't just a hobby, it was an escape. His father's strict discipline and high expectations cast a long shadow over him. Denver admired his father's achievements in aviation, but he also felt crushed under the weight of never being enough. In many ways, his songs about freedom, open skies, and finding a place to belong weren't just poetic. They were reflections of his own restless search for peace. That restless energy would soon push him to reinvent himself completely, setting the stage for a transformation that no one in his family could have predicted. From Henry to John Denver. By the time he reached college, Denver was supposed to be on a steady path. He studied architecture, a safe and respectable career choice. But sitting at a drafting table never felt right. The pull of music was too strong, and eventually, he dropped everything to chase a dream in Los Angeles. It was a bold move, and it meant leaving behind the name Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., a name he felt was far too heavy for a marquee. Inspired by the mountains he loved, he chose a new identity, John Denver. The name itself carried a sense of openness, freedom, and possibility, everything he wanted to embody as an artist. With this fresh start, he immersed himself in the folk scene, struggling at first, but slowly building connections. His first real break came when he joined the Chad Mitchell Trio, a well-known folk group at the time. It wasn't long before his songwriting talent started to shine. One of his early compositions, Leaving on a Jet Plane, was picked up by Peter, Paul, and Mary, and when their version soared to #1, Denver suddenly had his foot in the door of the music industry. But with success came pressure. The industry wasn't interested in Henry John, the quiet outsider with family baggage. They wanted John Denver, the fresh-faced troubadour who could capture the spirit of the times. And so, Denver leaned into this new persona, even as the gap between who he really was and who the world wanted him to be began to grow wider. That gap only deepened as his career took off, leading to one of the most remarkable rises in the history of folk music. Meteoric rise to stardom. By the early 1970s, John Denver wasn't just another folk singer. He was becoming the voice of a generation searching for something simple and pure in a chaotic world. His songs about nature, home, and belonging felt like a breath of fresh air during a time dominated by war, protests, and political unrest. Tracks like Take Me Home, Country Roads, Rocky Mountain High, and Sunshine on My Shoulders weren't just popular, they became anthems. Almost overnight, Denver transformed into one of the best-selling artists in America. His face was everywhere, television specials, magazine covers, and even sold-out stadium shows. At one point, his record sales rivaled the likes of Elvis Presley and the Beatles. For millions of fans, John Denver represented peace, optimism, and an escape from the noise of everyday life. But fame is a double-edged sword. The more successful he became, the harder it was to live up to the image that had been built around him. Everyone wanted John Denver, the cheerful troubadour in glasses and a wide smile. Few stopped to consider Henry John, the man who still carried the scars of his childhood, the weight of expectations, and the loneliness that fame couldn't erase. And as the spotlight grew brighter, cracks began to form beneath the surface. Cracks that hinted at struggles no one could have imagined from the man who seemed to have it all. A hidden temper and broken marriages. For all his gentle songs about love and nature, John Denver's personal life told a different story. Behind closed doors, he was often volatile, his temper flaring in ways that shocked those closest to him. Friends and family described him as deeply passionate, but also unpredictable. When frustrations boiled over, he could be destructive, sometimes even lashing out in ways that left lasting scars. His marriage to Annie Martel, the woman immortalized in Annie's song, started as a fairy tale. Fans adored the idea of the golden couple living an idyllic life in the Colorado mountains. But the reality was far more turbulent. Denver's fame kept him on the road for months at a time, and the distance slowly eroded their relationship. He wanted stability but also craved freedom, a contradiction that neither he nor Annie could ever fully resolve. Their split in 1982 revealed just how fractured things had become. Years later, Denver admitted to moments of shocking behavior during the breakdown of their marriage. Actions he himself said he was ashamed of. The same man who sang about tenderness and devotion also wrestled with anger and impulsiveness that often pushed people away. A second marriage to Australian actress Cassandra Delaney brought a brief spark of hope, but it too ended in heartbreak. The cycle of passion, distance, and collapse repeated itself, leaving Denver with more loneliness than love. And while his personal relationships were crumbling, another dangerous struggle was beginning to take root, one that would bring even more chaos into his life. Confessions and reputation collapse. By the late 1980s, the image of John Denver as America's wholesome folk hero was starting to fall apart. Years of personal turmoil and bad decisions had left him vulnerable, and soon his struggles spilled into the public eye. Denver began speaking openly about his inner battles, confessing to heavy drinking and a reliance on substances that clouded his judgment. He was arrested more than once for driving under the influence, incidents that splashed across headlines and shocked fans who still clung to the memory of the clean-cut singer from the country roads era. Each arrest chipped away at the carefully polished persona that had made him a household name. Even worse were the reports of erratic behavior. Friends described him as increasingly unpredictable, sometimes warm and generous, other times explosive and reckless. He admitted in interviews that fame had distorted his sense of self, making it difficult to know where John Denver the artist ended and Henry John the man began. For a public that once viewed him as the safe, smiling face of folk music, these revelations were jarring. His confessions didn't just expose his flaws, they shattered the illusion that had sustained his career. By the early 90s, Denver's reputation had shifted from beloved folk icon to troubled star, struggling to reconcile his legacy with the reality of his choices. And yet, for all the damage done, there was still one passion that consumed him completely, an obsession that offered freedom, but would ultimately seal his fate. The activist and international icon. Even as his personal life unraveled, John Denver never stopped reaching for something greater than fame. Behind the headlines of arrests and failed marriages, he was quietly building a second identity, not as a musician, but as an activist. Denver was outspoken about issues many celebrities of his era avoided. He championed environmental causes long before it was fashionable, using his platform to warn about pollution, deforestation, and the fragility of the planet. Songs like Rocky Mountain High weren't just ballads about nature, they were calls to protect it. His deep connection to the wilderness of Colorado became a driving force in his activism, and fans who once saw him as just a singer began to view him as a voice for the earth itself. He also threw himself into humanitarian work, fighting hunger and advocating for peace. At the height of the Cold War, Denver even performed in the Soviet Union, becoming one of the few Western artists to cross that political divide. His music carried a message of unity that transcended borders, making him an unlikely ambassador in a world that seemed permanently split. These efforts earned him global recognition. Awards, invitations to speak before Congress, and a place in international conversations about the environment and humanity all came his way. While his reputation at home had been bruised, overseas he was often celebrated as a symbol of hope and conscience. But even with this global respect, Denver's personal hunger for freedom and the thrill of risk pulled him towards something far more dangerous than music or activism, something that gave him a rush unlike anything fame could ever provide: the obsession with flying. For John Denver, music was only one way to feel free. His true escape came when he was in the sky. From the moment he first took flying lessons, aviation became more than a hobby. It was a passion that consumed him. He spoke about the rush of lifting off the ground, the silence above the clouds, and the perspective it gave him on life. Friends recalled that whenever Denver wasn't on stage, he wanted to be in a cockpit. But with that passion came risk. Denver wasn't just a casual pilot. He collected planes, often flying experimental or unusual models that demanded skill and focus. While he had plenty of training, his daredevil spirit sometimes pushed him into dangerous situations. More than once, he was criticized for taking unnecessary risks, even after his struggles with alcohol had raised concerns about whether he should be flying at all. Still, the sky was where he felt most alive. Fame had burdened him, relationships had failed him, but flying made him feel untouchable, like Henry John and John Denver could finally exist as one. He once described flying as the closest thing to pure freedom he had ever known, a release from the weight of his past and the chaos of celebrity. But obsession has its price. And in 1997, that love for the skies would collide with tragedy, bringing his story to a sudden and devastating end. The tragic final flight. On October 12, 1997, John Denver took to the skies one last time, unaware that this flight would end in tragedy. He had purchased a small experimental aircraft, and, despite owning it for only a day, he felt confident enough to practice takeoffs and landings alone. The plane, however, was far from simple. It had been heavily modified, and the placement of the fuel selector valve made it awkward and unsafe to operate. Even something as basic as checking the fuel required a handheld mirror. As Denver practiced near Monterey Peninsula Airport, the inevitable occurred. The left fuel tank ran dry, and in attempting to switch to the right tank, he accidentally pressed the right rudder pedal. The nose of the plane dipped sharply, and within seconds, the aircraft plunged into the Pacific Ocean. Denver was killed instantly. Investigators later determined that the crash could have been avoided. He had started the flight with too little fuel, and his unfamiliarity with the plane's modifications contributed to the accident. The National Transportation Safety Board pointed out that the unsafe design of the aircraft, combined with Denver's risky flying habits, created a perfect storm. Even though no alcohol or drugs were involved in the crash, this tragic event underscored a pattern in Denver's life: a relentless pursuit of freedom and exhilaration, sometimes at the expense of safety. His deep love for flying, once a symbol of joy and independence, had become intertwined with recklessness. The world mourned the loss of a beloved musician, but for those who knew the full story, his death was a sobering reminder of the complex man behind the songs. John Denver's final flight sealed the narrative of a life filled with soaring highs and perilous risks, a life that touched millions on the ground and in the air. The dual legacy. John Denver's life was a study in contrasts. To millions, he was the gentle voice of the 1970s, a singer-songwriter whose songs celebrated love, nature, and the simple joys of life. Hits like Take Me Home, Country Roads, Rocky Mountain High, and Annie's Song became timeless anthems, connecting people across generations and continents. His dedication to environmental causes, humanitarian efforts, and international peace further cemented his reputation as a compassionate and socially conscious icon. Yet behind the public image, Denver's personal life told a far more complicated story. Struggles with relationships, a volatile temper, risky behavior, and a series of legal and personal challenges revealed a man grappling with his own demons. The very qualities that made him extraordinary, his passion, intensity, and relentless drive, sometimes led to dangerous choices, culminating in the tragic final flight that took his life. This duality is what makes Denver's legacy both inspiring and cautionary. Fans remember the music that moved them, the advocacy that changed lives, and the joy he brought into homes worldwide. At the same time, his story serves as a reminder that fame and talent do not shield anyone from personal struggles or poor decisions. Ultimately, John Denver remains a figure of profound complexity, a man whose soaring melodies and humanitarian spirit left an indelible mark, yet whose human flaws remind us that even icons carry hidden shadows. His life, full of triumphs and trials, continues to resonate, proving that greatness is rarely simple and that every legacy is, in some way, dual.